mean, he may still not get
Oh,
out
this
of
is
it.
leading to mate.
It's
This is
mate.
this
So
should
queen
yeah.
comes to h8, backdoor. Queen h8, king f7, the rook comes to f8. This is
Rook
good
e8.
old-fashioned family fun, everybody.
So classic commentary from Danny Wrench and Eric Hansen, and a classic match to boot. So this is 2017. It's Hikaru Nakamura versus Magnus Carlsen, the Speed Chess Championship final, and I just love looking back over these old classics. So Magnus here with white. What could he do? This is blitz chess. They do get a bit of increment on the clock as well. Hikaru, he's under pressure in the match. So Magnus kicks off with d4. We get knight f6, c4, and Hikaru now heads for the king's Indian defense. But here Magnus doesn't play in the usual manner, with say knight c3 or something normal. He goes pawn b4, aggressively throwing those pawns on the queen side already. We get d6 in response, pawn e3, blunts this bishop, but it is going to fianchetto soon. We now get castles, bishop e2 and e5, thematically striking at the centre. And you can't win a pawn here, that's no good, or you're actually opening this diagonal in a horrible manner. You're getting sourced, as Hikaru would say, right? So instead, Magnus just goes knight c3, calmly developing. We get e4, drives back this knight, the pawn is attacked. Rook e8 defends, bishop b2 developing, and now Hikaru chucks this h-pawn down the board. If in doubt, chuck your h-pawns, or your rook's pawns, sorry. That's what Alpha Zero's taught us. But this move does make some sense, because although you're weakening the king, you are trying to weaken the white king, you know, run it all the way down to here, try and force g3, weaken the light squares, and all of Magnus's pieces are over here. So it's not like there's some big kingside attack coming to take advantage of that weakness. So h3 from Magnus. He doesn't want to allow this pawn structure with a pawn on g3 and h2. Now we get h4 from Hikaru, b5 from Magnus. He carries on that space game. And now Hikaru finally turns his attention to the queen side, pushes c6, tries to undermine this pawn chain somewhat. It's been a long day. Hay fever's still killing me. a4 from Magnus. He supports the pawn. And now bishop f5 develops, and a5 cracking on with that big expansion on the queen side. a6 a threat just to rip open these pawns. So Hikaru decides he's going to push a6. Now the computer does mention b6 as a move here, but Magnus plays much more logically, humanly. He opens lines where he's got his pieces, where he's attacking. The pawn recaptures, we get castles, knight b to d7, and now this next move from Magnus is just absolutely awesome. So he plays here knight to a4, sacking a pawn, which Hikaru takes, and it is one of the top moves. Why would you do this? Well, then c5 is the idea. And for the sake of that pawn, he's just activating pieces. This knight is now looking at dark squares. This one can come to c4. That's a big threat in the position. And the rook is now blasting down against this pawn in combination with a number of pieces. So how long is Hikaru actually going to be able to hold on to that pawn? So the queen now drops back. If you go d5, by the way, no good, because knight b6 opens up the attack on the queen, and once it moves, you can go queen c2, defend your bishop, and you're soon going to actually lose that queen. It gets trapped. So pushing d5, no good, and equally if you capture, well again the pieces just spring to life. The rook is opened up on the queen. It could retreat, but then you lose this pawn. If it comes to b6, well now this knight jumps in. Big initiative. Lovely play. So queen c7 played, getting out of dodge after winning that pawn. Now we see the pawn takes here, the queen recaptures, and knight c4 comes anyway. So the queen under fire, has to retreat. Knight c5, great play on the dark squares. Magnus wants to capture to open up his bishop, and we do see that soon. But first, the a pawn saves itself from the double attack. We now get bishop c3, intensifying the pressure on that pawn, and Hikaru now decides that this is the time to take. Why would he do this? Give this nice advanced pawn, these squares, this one's a bit horrible. Well, knight d5 is his plan. He pressures the bishop, opens up this diagonal, and Magnus correctly assesses that he should chop this one off, not go after this pawn right now, weaken the dark squares around the king. So queen d4 check. Now the king goes. Knight d6 hits that amazing outpost. Magnus still a pawn down, but look at his compensation. And the rook now saves itself, and bishop c4 intensifies the pressure. Magnus doesn't take here, by the way, because although you rip open the king, actually that's a pretty monster knight. Who knows if this pawn is coming here one day to rip open the white king, plus black's got the outside runner now, could get dangerous. So Magnus correctly goes bishop c4, adds the pressure. Now we get rook b4, pinning that bishop. So rook fb1 challenges the powerful rook. This one doubles behind, Magnus captures, and now not rook recaptures played. Looks really logical to carry on this pin, but then there's an amazing tactic here which basically ends the game on the spot if you want to try and find it. So the move to play is knight to e8, because this rook has just left the back rank. And you hit the queen, so say it saves itself, right? Queen e7, very logical. Well, now you're getting literally checkmated. That's the point. You hit the queen and threatened mate. So coming back here, we didn't see takes with the rook, we see takes with the pawn, and black does now have this dangerous running pawn. So Magnus chops on d5, the pawn recaptures. Now here the computer does want to take on f5, pawn recaptures, and this line is awesome. Rook a6, preparing to swing the rook and then deliver some deadly stuff down in the corner. So you actually have to go rook e8 to prepare to meet this one with queen e5, etc, etc. But a very cool line if Magnus had taken here and found rook a6. But okay, deep stuff, they're getting low on time. Magnus just takes the pawn in the centre, restores the material balance, but this passed pawn now on the b file is dangerous, and Hikaru starts running it in just a moment. So first, takes the time out to cover this pawn. Queen f6 from Magnus, invades, the bishop drops back, and now he pushes on with pawn c6, trying to distract this queen, because if you take here, well now then the white queen is crashing through here. So the pawn is immune, it's not captured by Hikaru. Instead, he pushes his own passed pawn. We get rook b1 coming behind the pawn, and now rook b6. So Hikaru's got this threat to capture this one, and Magnus just calmly comes back with rook a1 because this rook has now left the back rank. And what happens if you win this pawn? Well, now this rook crashes through with check. After the king goes, that's mate, and otherwise you have to start blocking and giving up pieces, and you know that's absolutely awful. So coming back here, we didn't see the pawn captured. Instead, it drops back, covers the back rank. Now we see the knight take on f7, so Magnus cashing in. Why? Well, after queen d6, rook c8 played, here's his idea, he wants to get active with the rook. Now Hikaru comes back to e8, pressuring this pawn. We see rook a7, so Magnus gives this pawn, which Hikaru captures, but this is his idea. Generate this huge mating attack against the black king, and it's really hard to stop, even though you've got this running pawn. So we see rook c1 check, king h2, queen b8 check, coming onto this deadly diagonal here. So g3 is played, pawn captures with check, but not a recapture, or then you open up this second rank, and that's perpetual, could be worse if you step to the wrong squares. So king g2, played by Magnus instead. He's still ahead here. We see rook c7, desperate to defend, but now check, the king goes, and rook to a8, supported by the queen. I mean, look at that geometry, just beautiful. And now when the queen moves, well, it looks like you should check from here. But actually then the king goes, and if you check again, the rook blocks, so you have to be a bit careful. Instead, Magnus finds the best move of queen to d8, threatening mate in 1. So the king runs up the board. Now we see queen h4 check, king g7, the queen checks from back here, and this is where the commentary team had just written Magnus off. Here's the clips, right? Hikaru off.
I mean, he may still not get out.
Oh, this is leading to mate.
It's
This
mate.
is-
So queen comes to h8 backdoor. Queen h8, king f7. The rook comes to f8. This is Good old-fashioned family fun, everybody.
So the king goes to f7, rook f8 check, king here. Looks like it should be curtains, but it's not so straightforward, because you want to check like this, drive the king up, and then keep going with this staircasing thing, but then the rook blocks. How are you making progress? Not so good. Or you can run with king c4. However, coming back here, after queen f6 check, king d5, the move to play is rook to e8. Very, very subtle stuff, not easy to see. But this allows the rook to check from here and e5. That's the key difference. So now if the pawn runs, for example, well, this is one sample line of how you can start driving the king around. Now the rook can come to e5. You get something like this, the king comes back, just a sample line, none of it forced, but there are a number of forced mating patterns. So queen f6 check, the way to go. But we get rook f6 check, and now the king is running. Check. Now it runs some more. Check from here. Technically the computer says this is a draw, but watch how things develop, because after this check here, Magnus has now blundered into a lost position because of this pawn. So we get the king coming down, more checks, the king running, the pieces are blocking, and now b2. What a deadly interception with that pawn. Queen c3 check, the queen now blocks, we get some desperate piece swaps, a few more checks, but in a moment Hikaru staggers away with his king, offers the queen exchange, even throws in pawn takes on f2. King recaptures, queen d3, offering an exchange. Yes, we get check, but after king b3, Magnus resigns the game despite the fact it looked like he was about to mate Hikaru. Why did he resign? Well, this king is just running, down to b1 or c1 or d1, something like that. And then at some point, you'll interpose the check with the queen with a counter check, get them off the board. This pawn is just going through. So I hope you enjoyed that epic game. To see another, check out the video on screen, and thanks very much for watching.